The sister who was cut out of the family photo. Have you noticed? Every powerful family writes its own legend. They choose which faces are allowed to appear, they choose which stories are allowed to be told, and they also choose a few names that must disappear as if they never existed. The Kennedy family is the perfect example of that kind of legend. People remember the football photo shoots at Heiresses, the lavish parties, the radiant smiles at the White House, but behind that glossy facade, there was a sister in the family who was turned into a secret. A sister who underwent lobotomy surgery at the age of 23, hidden in treatment facilities for 20 years without a single visit from her family, and erased from official records to the point that even her siblings didn't know where she was or whether she was alive or dead. Her name is Rosemary Kennedy. Before we begin the video, I want to explore some issues concerning Rosemary Kennedy. If you are born into a family where perfection is mandatory, do you have the right to be vulnerable? Oh, how many tragedies begin simply because a powerful person thinks they know better. If a decision for the common good destroys a person, is it still justified? Is a 20-year silence still protective or complicit? Who truly bears the consequences of decisions made by powerful people? Is a family's true legacy power or the wounds they leave behind? Let's explore together, and the surprise is at the end of the video. Rosemary was the eldest daughter in the family, born in 1918, and from the moment of her birth, her fate was sealed by a decision that was procedurally correct, but biologically wrong. On September 13, 1918, in Brookline, Massachusetts, Rose Kennedy went into labor at the worst time in American medical history. The Spanish flu pandemic, the hospital was overwhelmed. Her obstetrician was unavailable. And in a panic, a nurse did what was considered proper procedure at the time. She instructed Rose Kennedy to clamp her legs together, hold the baby in place, and wait for the doctor to arrive. Can you imagine? While contractions were coming in, the baby's head was already emerging, and the mother was told to hold on. According to major biographical sources, that period lasted nearly 2 hours, although some historians debate the exact number. But the crucial point is, during that time the baby was trapped in the birth canal, deprived of oxygen right as its brain was forming. The doctors didn't arrive in time. By the time Rosemary was finally born, the damage had already occurred. Today, modern medicine calls this hypoxic brain injury in newborns. It can lead to intellectual disability, motor developmental delays, and lasting limitations. As Rosemary grew older, the family received a gentler term, an accident in the womb. Sounds like a pain-relieving statement, right? But the truth is, the procedure was followed, and it was the procedure that broke a child's life. When Rosemary was 2, what her parents were usually proud of had become a source of fear in the Kennedy household. She struggled to seek, crawl, and walk. Slow to develop fine motor skills, slow to reach almost every milestone. And while Rosemary struggled with each small step, her siblings born close together were in the Kennedy family's production line. The children began to surpass her in every respect. Jack was born just a year after Rosemary, then Kathleen, then Eunice, one by one, and this is the part that makes the story chilling. For Joseph Kennedy, Rosemary's father, that slowdown wasn't just a difference. He saw it as a crack in the image. Joseph Kennedy was a man who refused to accept limitations. He rose from the status of a despised Irish Catholic to a Wall Street tycoon, then power in Hollywood, then the American ambassador. He refused to give up. He refused to accept weakness, and he certainly couldn't stand the fact that his eldest daughter couldn't become a reflection of Kennedy ambition. Rosemary was sent to public school, but struggled so much that she was held back several times, watching her friends move on while she was held back. The family kept moving her from school to school, boarding, convent, from one place to another. Do you see that loop? It wasn't about finding the right place for Rosemary. It was about finding a place that could fix Rosemary. But some things don't need fixing, they just need to be understood. Then, in 1938, there was a rare moment in Rosemary's life when she touched the light. Joseph Kennedy was appointed the American ambassador to Great Britain. The whole family moved to London, including their daughter, whom they had always worried about and been ashamed of for not being perfect. There, Rosemary attended a convent school run by the Assumption Sisters at Belmont House. The curriculum was Montessori, learning through experience, personalized pace, teaching practical life skills instead of rigorous academic competition. And for the first time, Rosemary was placed in an environment designed for her, not against her. She progressed. Even though Rosemary was older than the other students, she was given a role that changed her self-perception. Teaching assistant to Mother Isabel, the head of the school. It sounds small, but for a girl who had been considered a problem for years, being trusted with responsibility was revolutionary. She was needed, she was useful, she was contributing. During her time in London, Rosemary was able to read with more confidence. Her favorite book was Winnie the Pooh, one of the few she could read fluently. She read to the children with expression and emotion as if she were truly telling a story. And you know what? The feeling of "I can do it" sometimes saves a person longer than medicine. The culmination of this period was in 1938, when Rosemary was presented to the British royal family along with her sister Kathleen. The ceremony required a complex bow before the king and queen, before the nobility and the camera lenses. Rosemary practiced for hours. Practiced until her feet ached, practiced until every movement became a bodily reflex, and when the moment came, she performed perfectly. The camera captured her radiant smile afterward, in a white dress and feathers, a girl who had proven to the world and to herself that she could do what others thought she couldn't. Rosemary's diary recorded afternoon teas, dances, concerts, outings with young men, the ordinary joys of a young girl. Perhaps that was the only time in Rosemary Kennedy's life she lived like a normal person, without comparison, without being judged as a fault in her family. Then the war came. In 1939, Germany advanced across Europe. Joseph Kennedy decided to bring the whole family back to America. Rosemary begged him. She begged him not to take her away from Belmont House, the only place where she had ever found stability, purpose, and happiness. But Joseph dragged her along anyway. He prioritized safety over his daughter's meaningful life. He prioritized logic over the blossoming she had just begun to experience. And that decision would lead to a collapse that he said he feared, but which he actually anticipated. And that was just the beginning. Rosemary Kennedy wasn't erased because she did something wrong. She was erased because she didn't fit in with a family obsessed with perfection. But the terrifying thing is, there was a time when Rosemary almost had a normal life, and that's when the real tragedy began. When the light goes out, when Rosemary returned to America, the first thing that disappeared wasn't her ability to study. It was her sense of security. The environment Rosemary had just built in London, where she was understood, trusted, and needed, was shattered by a single decision from her father. Belmont House vanished from her life as if it had never existed, and with it, the fragile stability Rosemary had spent nearly 20 years striving for, also dissolved. The change happened so quickly that it frightened even the Kennedy family. In her personal diary, Rose Kennedy recorded in a cold, almost clinical tone, the skills she had painstakingly acquired in London gradually disappeared. Her gentle nature gave way to tension and agitation. She flew into a rage. She screamed. She threw things. She smashed vases. At times, she attacked those around her with enough force to cause injury. She experienced seizures, a sign that this was more than just a behavioral problem. Rosemary also began sneaking out at night. For a family obsessed with image like the Kennedys, this wasn't just worry, it was a nightmare. They imagined Rosemary meeting the wrong person, a scandal, a pregnancy, an indelible stain on the political path they had laid out for their sons. But what Joseph and Rose Kennedy didn't want to face was this. What Rosemary was experiencing was very likely the emergence of mental illness superimposed on a pre-existing intellectual disability, the shock of being deprived of a stable environment, hormonal changes during adulthood, genetic facts in a family where many members would later struggle with depression, addiction, and psychological disorders. Rosemary needed treatment. Patience, special care was needed, and the Kennedys, if there was anything they didn't lack, it was money and the power to do the right thing. But Joseph Kennedy had never been patient with what he considered mistakes. His whole life he solved problems with money, influence, and threats. He bought elections, manipulated the market, suppressed scandals before they even made the news, and now in his eyes his daughter had become a problem. Joseph began searching for doctors, for surgeons, not to treat her, but to control her. In the fall of 1941, he heard of a new method, touted as a miracle of modern medicine, prefrontal lobe resection. This procedure was championed by doctors Walter Freeman and James Watts, who promised it could transform difficult-to-manage patients into obedient, quiet, and easily manipulated individuals. The American Medical Association had clearly warned at the time. The method was too experimental, the consequences were serious, and it should not be applied on a large scale. Joseph Kennedy didn't care. The doctors told him that after the surgery, Rosemary would be calmer. No more sneaking out, no more outbursts, no more threats to his son's political careers. That was enough. He didn't tell his wife. He didn't ask his children. He didn't seek a second opinion from doctors who might advise him to stop. He simply arranged for the surgery that would destroy his daughter's brain. On November 20th, 1941, 23-year-old Rosemary Kennedy was admitted to George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C. She wasn't told what she was about to undergo. She remained fully conscious throughout the operation. 2 holes were drilled into her skull. A spoon-like device called a leukotomy was inserted into her brain. Doctors began cutting connections in the frontal lobe, the area that controls personality, judgment, and emotions. While they were cutting, they asked Rosemary to sing "God Bless America." As they cut deeper, they told her to recite the Lord's Prayer. As they continued to destroy more neural pathways, they told her to count down from 100. Each of Rosemary's responses was a measure of the extent of brain damage. When her speech became jumbled, they continued cutting. When she could no longer form complete sentences, they continued. They only stopped when Rosemary became completely silent. The surgery lasted about an hour, but the consequences lasted a lifetime. When Rosemary woke up, the person she once was gone. She couldn't walk, she couldn't speak in complete sentences, she had no control over her bladder or bowels. Her intellectual capacity had regressed to that of a 2-year-old. The procedure promised as a solution had rendered her utterly helpless, and Joseph Kennedy's first reaction wasn't regret. It was concealment. London showed Rosemary how well she could live, and that's why, when she was pulled from there, she collapsed faster than anyone ever thought. The tantrums, the outbursts of anger, the night she sneaked out. In the eyes of the Kennedy family, Rosemary was no longer a girl in need of help. She became a danger. And when a powerful family sees their daughter as a danger, they don't seek to heal, they seek to eliminate. Disappearing from the world after the surgery, Rosemary was no longer the problem that Joseph Kennedy had feared. She became a secret that needed to be kept deeply hidden. Joseph's first action wasn't to bring his daughter home, nor was it to find the best rehabilitation plan. Instead, it was to find a place discreet enough so that no one would see the consequences of his decision. Rosemary was transferred to Craig House, a private psychiatric hospital in Beacon, New York. It wasn't known for its advanced treatment methods, it was known for something else: absolute silence. Craig House catered to wealthy families who wanted to erase a loved one from public life without attracting attention. Rosemary wasn't allowed to socialize with other patients. She lived alone in a small house on the grounds. She didn't participate in any activities. No social contact, no public appearances. Be daughter of the former American ambassador. Even more terrifying. For 8 years, from 1941 to 1949, none of Rosemary's siblings knew where she was. No John F. Kennedy, no Robert, no Eunice, who had once been closest to Rosemary. Joseph Kennedy said nothing to them. He lied. He orchestrated the silence meticulously. And what about Rose Kennedy? The mother begged to see her daughter. Her husband reassured her that visits would agitate Rosemary, that she is adjusting, that it is best to leave her alone. The truth was much simpler. Joseph Kennedy did not dare let his wife see what he had done. He allowed a surgery to take place behind her back, he destroyed their daughter without her mother's consent, and he knew that if Rose saw Rosemary now, she would never forgive him. In 1949, after Craig House became embroiled in allegations of sexual abuse of patients, Joseph moved Rosemary again. This time to St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Jefferson, Wisconsin, a small remote town where the Kennedy name carried no weight. He had a separate house built for Rosemary, isolated even from the other disabled students at the school. The ban on contact with her family remained in place. For 20 years, from 1941 to 1961, none of her siblings visited, not a single family letter. Her mother was prevented from seeing her own daughter. Joseph Kennedy told different stories to each person. To one person, Rosemary preferred to live in seclusion. To one person, she was teaching in the Midwest. To another, she was fine, but needed space. Each lie was designed to block out the question, to block out the investigation, to block out the truth that the man behind the model American family had removed his daughter's brain lobes and locked her away to protect his political ambitions. Meanwhile, his sons rose through the ranks. John Kennedy was elected to the House of Representatives, then the Senate, then President of the United States in 1960. Throughout that journey, his eldest sister sat in a small house in Wisconsin, relearning how to walk, speaking in short, fragmented sentences, living a life that her own family had erased from collective memory. Joseph Kennedy thought he had succeeded until history turned back in a cruel way. On December 19, 1961, exactly 20 years after Rosemary's surgery, Joseph Kennedy suffered a severe stroke while playing golf in Palm Beach. He was paralyzed from the waist down. He could not speak. He could not control his own body. The man who had silenced his daughter was now silenced himself. And for the first time in 2 decades, Joseph Kennedy was no longer in control of his family. That surgery didn't end when the doctor closed the incision. It ended when Rosemary could no longer speak. And the first thing her father did after seeing the results was not regret, but concealment. Rosemary Kennedy did not die on the operating table, but from that moment, she began to disappear from the world. Disappearing from the world after the surgery, Rosemary was no longer the problem that Joseph Kennedy had feared. She became a secret that needed to be kept deeply hidden. Joseph's first action wasn't to bring his daughter home, nor was it to find the best rehabilitation plan. Instead, it was to find a place discreet enough so that no one would see the consequences of his decision. Rosemary was transferred to Craig House, a private psychiatric hospital in Beacon, New York. It wasn't known for its advanced treatment methods, it was known for something else: absolute silence. Craig House catered to wealthy families who wanted to erase a loved one from public life without attracting attention. Rosemary wasn't allowed to socialize with other patients. She lived alone in a small house on the grounds. She didn't participate in any activities. No social contact, no public appearances. Big daughter of the former American ambassador. Even more terrifying. For 8 years, from 1941 to 1949, none of Rosemary's siblings knew where she was. No John F. Kennedy, no Robert, no Eunice, who had once been closest to Rosemary. Joseph Kennedy said nothing to them. He lied. He orchestrated the silence meticulously. And what about Rose Kennedy? The mother begged to see her daughter. Her husband reassured her that visits would agitate Rosemary, that she is adjusting, that it is best to leave her alone. The truth was much simpler. Joseph Kennedy did not dare let his wife see what he had done. He allowed a surgery to take place behind her back. He destroyed their daughter without her mother's consent, and he knew that if Rose saw Rosemary now, she would never forgive him. In 1949, after Craig House became embroiled in allegations of sexual abuse of patients, Joseph moved Rosemary again. This time to St. Coletta School for Exceptional Children in Jefferson, Wisconsin, a small remote town where the Kennedy name carried no weight. He had a separate house built for Rosemary, isolated even from the other disabled students at the school. The ban on contact with her family remained in place. For 20 years, from 1941 to 1961, none of her siblings visited, not a single family letter. Her mother was prevented from seeing her own daughter. Joseph Kennedy told different stories to each person. To one person, Rosemary preferred to live in seclusion. To one person, she was teaching in the Midwest. To another, she was fine, but needed space. Each lie was designed to block out the question, to block out the investigation, to block out the truth that the man behind the model American family had removed his daughter's brain lobes and locked her away to protect his political ambitions. Meanwhile, his sons rose through the ranks. John Kennedy was elected to the House of Representatives, then the Senate, then President of the United States in 1960. Throughout that journey, his eldest sister sat in a small house in Wisconsin, relearning how to walk, speaking in short, fragmented sentences, living a life that her own family had erased from collective memory. Joseph Kennedy thought he had succeeded until history turned back in a cruel way. On December 19, 1961, exactly 20 years after Rosemary's surgery, Joseph Kennedy suffered a severe stroke while playing golf in Palm Beach. He was paralyzed from the waist down. He could not speak. He could not control his own body. The man who had silenced his daughter was now silenced himself. And for the first time in 2 decades, Joseph Kennedy was no longer in control of his family. That surgery didn't end when the doctor closed the incision. It ended when Rosemary could no longer speak. And the first thing her father did after seeing the results was not regret, but concealment. Rosemary Kennedy did not die on the operating table, but from that moment, she began to disappear from the world. The erected sister and an unexpected legacy. When the truth about Rosemary gradually emerged within the Kennedy family, it didn't create an immediate explosion. No press conference, no public apology, no confession to America, but it gnawed from within, especially at the younger brother who had risen to the highest position of power in the world. In February 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered a special address to Congress on mental health and intellectual disability. The language of that speech was different from any previous one. He didn't talk about isolation. He didn't talk about burden management. He spoke about dignity. He called for halving the number of people confined to closed treatment facilities. He advocated for community-based care. He said that people with disabilities weren't a problem to hide, but citizens to be protected. Those words didn't come from political books. They came from a sister who had been cut off from her family. In October 1963, the Community Mental Health Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by J.F., just 22 days before his assassination in Dallas. This act fundamentally changed American psychiatric policy, moving away from the model of confining people to remote institutions that had held Rosemary captive for 2 decades. But the most profound impact came from Rosemary's closest sister. Eunice Kennedy Shriver couldn't save her sister. That haunted her for life, and instead of turning her back, Eunice turned that pain into action. In 1962, she opened a small summer camp in her Maryland home for children with intellectual disabilities. That camp was called Camp Shriver. There was no pity, no segregation, only movement, joy, and a sense of recognition. 6 years later, that program evolved into the Special Olympics, officially launched in 1968. Today, the Special Olympics serves more than 4.7 million athletes in over 170 countries. Each of them lives on in history. Because Eunice couldn't save Rosemary by 1990, the youngest surviving sibling, Ted Kennedy Akon, sponsored the Americans with Disabilities Act, a law he called the Disability Liberation Proclamation, NICET's people with disabilities in America. More than 26 million Americans are legally protected by that law. And it all stemmed from a sister who was considered a shame. Rosemary Kennedy died on January 7, 2005. At the age of 86, she outlived her father, who had undergone a lobotomy. By more than 3 decades, she outlived her mother, who had been unable to protect her, by nearly 10 years. She outlived John, Robert, Kathleen, and Joe Jr. The person Joseph Kennedy tried to erase from history was the most enduring. When Rosemary passed away, her surviving siblings, Eunice, Jean, and Ted, were at her bedside. The family who had kept her hidden for 20 years were finally there to say goodbye to the sister they had been forbidden to know. Joseph Kennedy wanted to erase Rosemary because he feared she would threaten his son's political future. But Rosemary, in silence, in the shadows, became the invisible architect of a change that protected millions. There are those whose names are erased, but they refuse to disappear. Rach knees, no words, hang for the audience. Father suffers stroke, control system collapses. Mother reunites with her child after 20 years. Rosemary hits her mother, not out of hatred but because she feels abandoned. Lobotomy doesn't erase memories, only the ability to express who truly bears the consequences of power decisions. The ultimate paradox of a powerful family, the story of Rosemary Kennedy is not just a family tragedy. It is a moral paradox at the heart of the Kennedy myth, a family that built its image on words like progressive, compassionate, reformist, protective of the weak, but began by sacrificing the weakest member of the family. Joseph Kennedy believed he was doing what was necessary. In his logic, Rosemary was not a person to be understood, but a risk to be eliminated. He didn't hate his daughter, he loved his ambition more, and that is the most terrifying aspect of this story. There are no screaming demons, no outbursts of madness. Only a powerful, calm, rational father making a rational decision in his world. It is precisely this kind of decision that creates the most lasting disasters. Rosemary didn't die on the operating table. She lived, but she was stripped of her voice, her future, her youth, and her right to be present in her family. She was reduced to a void, that name never mentioned, a face cut out of a family photograph, and that void haunted those who remained. John F. Kennedy spoke of the dignity of people with disabilities, not because he read about it in a book, but because he knew the price of taking away that dignity. Eunice Kennedy Shriver didn't found the Special Olympics for a visual strategy, but because she couldn't bear the world treating children like her sister as worthless. Ted Kennedy didn't call the Americans with Disabilities Act a liberation manifesto by chance. He understood that his sister had lived her whole life in a form of legal imprisonment. Rosemary became something her father never anticipated, living proof of the moral limits of power. Joseph Kennedy wanted to control his family history, but history has a cruel habit. It always preserves what people try to erase. Ultimately, Rosemary, unable to speak, unable to campaign, unable to appear on camera, left a far deeper mark than many members of a family once celebrated nationwide. Her legacy lies not in words, it lies in the millions of people protected. Recognize a woman was once considered too flawed to exist. There are families that build power by concealing the truth, but that same truth, one day, will return and redefine their entire legacy. The person erased becomes a world changer. Rosemary has no voice, but influences national laws, mental health, policy, Special Olympics, disabilitation law. Enid Varden wants to erase his daughter, inadvertent, creating a legacy greater than all. Is the true legacy of a family power, or the wounds they leave behind? Thank you all for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, like, leave a comment, and share it with everyone.
Before I begin this story, I want you to try a very simple imagination. Imagine you were born richer than most people in the world. Not just living comfortably, but rich enough that money is no longer a concept. You don't need to think about bills. You don't need to think about work. You don't need to think about tomorrow. You have a private jet. You have a palace. You have powerful men lining up just to marry you. Sounds like a dream, right? But what if I told you that that woman lived her whole life feeling abandoned? That she grew up without ever knowing what a normal family was like? That despite marrying 7 times, she still died alone? That woman's name was Barbara Hutton. The American press called her by a very cruel name. The poor little rich girl. The poor little girl. The richest girl in America. And from that name alone, you see a great paradox. Because usually, when you mention poor, people think of poverty, deprivation, lack of opportunity. But Barbara Hutton had everything, except the most important thing, love. She was born an heir to the Woolworth Empire, the largest retail chain in America at the time. Her family fortune was so vast. It was estimated in hundreds of millions of dollars at the beginning of the 20th century. If converted to today's currency, that would be billions. But money couldn't protect Barbara from a very cold truth. From a young age, she learned a lesson no child should have to learn so early. That money can buy everything, except someone to stay with you simply because they love you. And Barbara Hutton's entire life, from lavish marriages, magnificent mansions, to her quiet death at age 66, was essentially a single journey. An unloved child, growing up, and trying to use money to buy back what she lost so early. So, the question I want you to keep in mind when you hear this story is, if you are born with everything, but no love, are you truly rich? A childhood no one wants to remember. Before Barbara Hutton became America's richest heiress, she was a very young child, and very lonely. When Barbara was just a little girl, her mother, Edna Woolworth, committed suicide. No goodbye, no explanation. Just one morning, the most important woman in Barbara's life disappeared forever. Try putting yourself in the shoes of a child at that time. You were born into a house full of servants, but there was no one to hug you when you cried. No one to say, "It's not your fault." After her mother's death, Barbara was placed in the care of caregivers, tutors, and nannies. People came and went. And what about her father? He was still alive, but he was coldly absent, not because of poverty, not because of war, but because he didn't know how to love. Money began to appear in Barbara's life in a very distorted way. When Barbara was sad, people gave her gifts. When Barbara was lonely, people bought her more toys. When Barbara asked, "Why isn't Mom here anymore?" no one answered. Instead, people wrote checks. And it was during this period that Barbara learned a very dangerous connection. That care always comes with money. That without money, you will be left behind. No hugs, no reassurance, only large rooms and silence. The press later loved to call Barbara the poor little rich girl, but few understood that pity didn't come from pity. It stems from the fact that the whole of America saw a truth. This was a child who had everything except a family. And when you grow up without proper love, you grow up with a haunting question. Will anyone stay with me if I don't pay them? That question followed Barbara throughout her life. It followed her into every marriage. It followed her into every relationship. It followed her every time she opened her wallet to keep a man around a little longer. And from here, Barbara's choices were no longer the choices of a grown woman, but the choices of a child who had been abandoned and feared it would happen again. In the next part, we will begin to see that more clearly than ever. Barbara grows up, becomes the woman society desires, and powerful men begin to appear. But the question is, do they love Barbara, or do they love what Barbara represents? The woman everyone wants to marry. As Barbara Hutton grew up, the world began to see her in a completely different light. No longer the poor little girl in silent rooms, but a young, beautiful, wealthy woman, and carrying a name that commanded societal attention. She appeared at the most extravagant parties, places where money wasn't for spending, but for displaying power. And very quickly, men began to appear. Not ordinary men, but prince, nobles, names with genealogies longer than Barbara's emotional life. To the outside world, Barbara Hutton was the perfect dream. Rich, beautiful, prestigious. A woman who, whoever marries her, has already won half their life. But for Barbara, each marriage wasn't a victory. It was a gamble that this time, maybe it would be different. This time, that man wouldn't leave. This time, she wouldn't have to pay to be loved. Barbara married for the first time when she was very young. A lavish wedding. The press celebrated. The whole of America watched every detail. But when the doors closed, when the lights went out, Barbara was confronted with a familiar feeling. Distance. The man beside her wasn't really there for who she was. They were there for her position, for her wealth, for what came with the Woolworth name. And Barbara did the only thing she knew how to do. She tried harder. She paid for everything. Buy a house, buying gifts, buying presents. Not because Barbara was stupid, But because she was afraid that if she stopped giving, people would leave, her first marriage ended. Then the second, then the third. Each divorce, Barbara didn't just lose a husband. She lost a little more faith that she could be loved without paying a price. And the scariest thing was, the more marriages she had, the more Barbara believed it was her fault. That if she were a little richer, a little gentler, a little more giving, then perhaps people would stay. But you and I both know that's not love. It's a silent contract. And in the next part, we'll go straight to the most dangerous place in Barbara's life, where money is no longer a tool for protection, but becomes something that binds her in toxic relationships. In the next part, we will talk about a very harsh truth. When you use money to keep a man around, you don't buy love. You're only delaying his departure. Love buyed with money. There came a point in Barbara Hutton's life when she stopped asking, "Does this person love me?" Instead, she asked a different, more practical question, colder. How much do I have to pay to keep this person? Barbara began entering relationships where the lines between husband and wife and patron became frighteningly blurred. She provided for her husband, paid off debts, bought real estate, bought cars, bought an entire lifestyle that, without Barbara, those men would never have been able to achieve. But in return, what did Barbara get? Presents, but not commitment. Her husbands were there, but their minds were not. And deep down, Barbara knew it. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't blind. She was simply too accustomed to paying for attention. When you grow up with love always conditional, you don't know how to demand unconditional love. You only know to give more. Barbara gave more money, more concessions, more silence. She accepted things that an ordinary woman would never accept. Betrayal, indifference, marriages that existed only on paper. Because for Barbara, divorce wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was confirmation of her greatest fear. No one will stay for me. And so the cycle continued. Marriage, hope, payment, disappointment, self-blame. Each time, Barbara lost a tiny part of herself. She became more reserved, more alone, and she was more dependent on money than ever before. Not because she loved money, but because money was the only thing that had never left her. But it was here that money began to betray Barbara. Because the more she gave, the more she attracted people who only knew how to take. And in the following part, we will see where that leads. When money is no longer a shield, when her fortune begins to evaporate, and when the richest woman in America begins her freefall, when money starts disappearing. For a long time, Barbara believed that money was the only thing she could control. If love wasn't certain, then money was the least, something that could make things work. But what Barbara didn't realize was that she never really controlled her money. From a very young age, Barbara's assets were always in the hands of others. Lawyers, advisors, managers, and people who claimed to be protecting her interests. Barbara signed papers without reading them carefully, trusted promises without questioning, because throughout her life, she had become accustomed to others making decisions for her. The money continued to flow out every day, to her ex-husband, to her new husband, to those who lived off her name. And no one told Barbara that. Her fortune was shrinking, not because of one single wrong decision, but because of hundreds of small decisions, each stemming from the same fear. If I say no, will they leave? Barbara continued to spend money to maintain relationships, continued to hold on to houses that were too big for a lonely person, continued to live a standard she could no longer afford. But the press still wrote as if she were infinitely rich. The public image didn't reflect the reality inside. While the world still saw Barbara as a symbol of extravagance, behind closed doors, she began to make choices, sell her jewelry, shrink her living space, cut back things that were once taken for granted. And what was the most painful thing? No one stays when money runs out. The people who used to surround Barbara disappeared. No arguments, no official breakups. They just disappeared. Barbara began to understand a truth very late. Money didn't leave her. People were the ones who left. And when money was no longer enough to keep others around, Barbara was forced to confront what she had avoided her whole life: true loneliness. Next, we will enter the darkest period of Barbara's life. No more lights, no more weddings, no more promises, just an older woman sitting amidst empty rooms and wondering where she went wrong. Loneliness in old age. There's something very strange about loneliness. When you're young, you think it's a phase. You believe someone will come along, then things will be different. But when you've been through too many breakups, too many misplaced hopes, loneliness is no longer a fear. It becomes a beat. In her later years, Barbara Hutton lived a very different life from the image the public knew her to have. No more parties, no more powerful men, no more feeling sought after, just an elderly woman with declining health and plenty of time to reminisce about the past. Barbara no longer lived in grand palaces, no more large entourage. Her life narrowed, both in space and emotionally. What hurt most was not Barbara's poverty, but the fact that she had no one to rely on, no real family, no true lasting friend. No one understood Barbara, except herself. The people who used to live off her money had long since disappeared. And for the first time in her life, Barbara no longer had to pay to keep someone around. Not because she had learned how to love properly, but because no one wanted to marry her anymore. The silence during these years was not noisy, not dramatic, but it was corrosive. Every day that passed, Barbara was forced to confront a question that she had avoided her whole life. If I have no money, am I still someone worth caring about? And perhaps the most painful thing for Barbara was not the loss of her wealth, but it was the realization that, even when she was at her richest, she had never been loved properly. In the next part, we will talk about the ending of this story. No noise, no lights, no crowds, just a very quiet death of a woman who once had it all. A quiet death. Barbara Hutton died not in a dramatic tragedy. No accident, no scandal, no sensational headlines. She passed away in the way her life had gradually unfolded. Quietly, no crowds by her bedside. No family gathered around. No people who had sworn to stay forever. Just a woman who had lived a long and was very tired. When news of Barbara's death appeared in the press, people no longer called her America's richest heiress. They called her by her old name, the name that had followed her her whole life, the poor little rich girl, as if everything she had, everything she had lost, was encapsulated in those 4 words. No one said much about Barbara's final years, because there's nothing to tell. No more power, no more money, no more men promising a future. Only one stark truth remains. The woman who was once richer than a nation died without leaving behind any truly lasting relationships. And when it all ended, no emotional legacy was mentioned. No one said, "She loved me. She was there for me when I needed her." Only numbers, marriages, and a story told as a warning. Barbara Hutton didn't die from lack of money. She died after a life lacking connection. And in the final part, there will be a surprise for you. We will close this story with the most important thing, not how much she left behind, but what she didn't get, legacy behind. When a person dies, people usually ask 2 questions. How much money do they leave behind? And what do they leave behind for others? With Barbara Hutton, the first question no longer holds much meaning, because most of her wealth had disappeared long before she passed away. But the second question is different. What did Barbara leave behind? She didn't leave behind a close-knit family. She didn't leave behind a complete love story. She didn't leave behind the image of a woman remembered for deep relationships. What Barbara left behind was a story that, if you listen slowly enough, you will realize it's not just about money. It's about a child growing up without proper love, about a woman who spent her life searching for security in places where it was impossible to find. Barbara tried to use money to replace presence. She used luxury to fill the void. She used marriage to prove she deserved to be loved. But there's a hard truth to accept. If you weren't loved as a child, you'll spend your whole life trying to find that feeling again, by any means, even if the price is yourself. Barbara Hutton's story isn't meant to evoke pity. nor is it meant to inspire admiration. It's there to remind us that money can buy someone's presence, but it can't buy them staying, because they truly want to. And perhaps Barbara's greatest legacy doesn't lie in any bank, but in the question for each of us: if one day you have nothing left to give, will anyone still stay just for you?
The Railroad Princess and the Man Who Couldn't Pay for Fake Pearls. Have you ever wondered why those born with every privilege in the world are often the ones who pay the highest price for their naivety? Behind every gilded age fortune lay ambition, risk-taking, and strategic genius. But for Helena Zimmerman, that fortune didn't bring freedom. It turned her into prey, a perfect prey. Beautiful, young, educated in Europe, and most importantly, the sole heir to a railroad and oil empire. Helena's father, Eugene Zimmerman, wasn't the kind of randomly rich man who got rich by luck. He was the embodiment of the American dream in its most ruthless form. Before we delve into today's story, let's explore why Helena Zimmerman ended up in this situation. Does money truly bring security? Is her noble title more trustworthy than a father's intuition? If it was all a lie from the start, why did Helena stay? How much money is enough for someone who doesn't know when to stop? If you've lost 30 years, would you dare to leave? And is it ever too late to start over? Would you choose tide or peace? Let's continue to find the reasons behind the story, and the surprise will be at the end of the via. I believe it won't disappoint you. A teenager rejected from the Union Navy for being too young, but persevered until he was accepted. An officer survived after his ship was hit by a Confederate torpedo thrown into the Yazoo River, then should have died. But he didn't die. He returned to the fight. He participated in key battles such as St. Charles and Duval's Bluff. In the Vicksburg campaign right in his hometown, Eugene commanded a gunboat breaking through the Confederate blockade with the recklessness only found in those who would either die young or become legends after the war. He left the military at age 20 with leadership experience, risk assessment, and survival instincts that no business school could teach. And then he did what very few people do at the right time. He invested in oil when the industry was in turmoil and sold it to John D. Rockefeller at the most opportune moment. In 1874, Eugene sold his oil assets to Standard Oil, not just for cash but also for shares and a seat on the board of directors. From there he moved into railroads, not small scale, not experimental. He became president of the Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton Railroad, and then controlled a series of routes in the Midwest and South. By 1900, Eugene Zimmerman was worth $10 million, equivalent to over $280 million today. Helena Zimmerman was born on September 25, 1878, into a family so wealthy that even robber barons were wary of her. But the first tragedy came early. When Helena was only 4 years old, her mother, Marietta Evans Zimmerman, died of peritonitis. That loss changed everything. Eugene, now his only daughter, decided to send Helena to France to study, not to show off, but to prepare her for the world of the international elite, where money is not enough and sophistication determines survival. In Europe, Helena was trained like a true aristocrat: horse riding, fencing, swimming, languages, social etiquette. She became the epitome of a perfect American heiress by 1900. Helena returned to high society with the appearance of a handsome blonde belle, young, charming, and completely unaware that she was being watched, because somewhere in the masquerade balls there was a man who didn't see Helena as a woman. He saw a walking bank account, and he bore a title that sounded incredibly impressive: the 9th Duke of Manchester. But behind that title lay a secret Helena had never been warned about. The bankrupt Duke, a title built on debt and desperation. What Helena didn't know was that the man pursuing her had been living off wealthy families long before he met her. That man was William Angus Drogo Montague, the 9th Duke of Manchester, a title that sounded powerful, but in reality it was just a facade for generations of bankruptcy. He inherited the title at the age of 15. And for the next 8 years, the only thing he learned was not estate management, not aristocratic responsibilities, but the art of surviving on other people's money. The Manchester family had long since squandered their fortune. The previous dukes were famous for hosting lavish banquets for the Prince of Wales, spending as if money were limitless, and marrying for hope, not for reality. His father, the 8th Duke, married Consuelo Iznaga, a Cuban heiress, but failed to secure the dowry he expected. When William succeeded to the throne, he reportedly knelt before the Prince of Wales to beg forgiveness for his family's financial embarrassment. A moment of humiliation shaped his entire being. From then on, he understood one thing very clearly. Without money, titles are just paper, and if he wanted to live like a duke, he needed to marry money. William Montagu didn't seek love, he hunted in the late 19th century. His name became infamous in both England and America as one of the most brazen fortune hunters of the era. In 1897, he unilaterally declared his engagement to another wealthy heiress, who was completely unaware. The girl's father, Abdin Gwalit, was so enraged that he declared before high society, "I would rather see my daughter dead than become the Duchess of Manchester." That statement should have been the final warning, but William didn't stop there. The list of wealthy women with whom he was almost engaged was so long that the press later published photographs of him surrounded by portraits of 22 women, whom he was said to have pursued, 22 opportunities, 22 potential accounts, 22 failures, until he saw Helena Zimmerman, a young American girl, the only daughter of a railroad tycoon, raised in Europe, motherless and yearning for a place in the old aristocracy. For William, Helena wasn't the 23rd woman, she was the perfect target. When rumors of the relationship reached Eugene Zimmerman, he immediately recognized the danger. Not because he despised the title, but because he understood the books. Eugene saw a duke, nearly Bancom, without a stable occupation, wandering between acting, journalism, and party, and with a history of approaching heiresses as a business strategy. He strongly objected, and he did what a strategist always does, stall for time. Eugene forced Helena to return to Cincinnati, hoping the distance would reveal William's true nature, but Helena was too deeply involved. In November 1900, she returned to England, lived this time with a guardian, but without her father. And that guardian was quickly seduced by William with his charm, his feigned poverty, and the promise of a glorious aristocratic life. On November 14, 1900, Helena Zimmerman married in secret at Marylebone Church, London. There was no father, no mother-in-law, no formal ceremony, only haste. Both families learned the news through the newspapers, and just weeks later, Helena would understand that the man she had just married couldn't even afford a fake wedding gift. The fake pearls scandal, when the marriage showed its true value, that secret marriage, less than a month old, exposed its true nature in a way that was both humiliating and symbolically cruel. December 1900, just weeks after the wedding, William Montagu, the new Duke of Manchester, decided to buy a gift for his young wife. Not a lavish royal gift, not an heirloom diamond, not a rare jewel. He bought 3 strings of fake pearls. From Frederick and Company on Broadway, New York, price $695. Even in 1900, that wasn't a large sum for a duke, not even significant for a man who had just married a millionaire heiress. But William Montagu didn't pay. It wasn't a matter of forgetting. It wasn't a delay due to procedural issues. It was simply, he didn't have the money, and he was used to having others pay for him. In 1901, Frederick and Company officially sued the Duke of Manchester for failing to pay for counterfeit jewelry. The Evening Express published the story with a historically insulting headline, "Imitation Jewelry. The Duke of Manchester sued. Counterfeit jewelry. The Duke of Manchester sued." For high society, this was more than just a lawsuit. It was a public farce. A duke, none able to afford real pearls, and even unable to pay for counterfeit pearls. Those 3 strings of pearls became the perfect metaphor for Helena's marriage, outwardly sparkling, bearing a noble title, but inwardly, completely empty. Helena was photographed many times wearing pearls at social events. No one knew whether those were the infamous strings of pearls or not, but that no longer mattered. Because now the truth was beginning to emerge in an undeniable way. Helena had married a man whose entire identity was a lie. The title was real, but the responsibilities were not. The demeanor was aristocratic, but the finances were abysmal, and worse than poverty, he had ambitions far greater than his ability to pay. Helena didn't know that at the time, but her experienced father did. Eugene Zimmerman, with the instincts of a seasoned industrialist, never bequeathed his entire estate to his daughter. He established trusts, complex legal structures, to prevent his son-in-law from directly accessing the assets, a fence, a layer of protection. But Eugene underestimated one thing. A man who lives by deception will never stop just because of the law. William Montagu didn't need ownership, he only needed the money. And somehow he convinced Eugene to continue funding his daughter's lifestyle. The money poured in, the parties began. In 1903, Eugene bought Kylemore Castle in Ireland as a wedding gift for the couple, a dream castle, and for William, a perfect stage to burn money. The parties lasted for days, noble guests, lavish hunting one weekend. The Duke and Duchess's entourage shot down over 1,000 pheasants just to show off their status. No Versailles needed that level of extravagance, but the bills still came, and Helena, the woman bearing the title of Duchess, began to understand a cold truth. She was not married to a man. She had become a source of funding. Castles, debts, and decline. How he burned through a dynasty from the beginning. William Montagu made no secret of how he spent money. He spent like someone accustomed to never facing the consequences. Kylemore Castle, a wedding gift from Eugene Zimmerman, was not a home. It was a showpiece. There, William held lavish hunting parties that lasted for days, where the nobility gathered, wine flowed like a river, and money vanished. Helena appeared alongside her husband as the Duchess of Manchester, but increasingly she became a mere ornament for a lifestyle she could neither control nor stop. Eugene Zimmerman, not because he believed his son-in-law had changed, but because he did not want his daughter to become a laughingstock of society. But no estate could withstand this kind of spending forever. Just 5 years after acquiring Kylemore Castle, by 1908, William was forced to sell his Irish estates. Spending had gone beyond all limits. During World War I, Kylemore Castle was mortgaged to pay off debts, and by the 1920s it was sold off completely. The ancestral estate of the Manchester family, Gimbolton Castle, also began to tremble under the weight of debt. In 1915, William Montagu was officially declared bankrupt, not in silence, not discreetly, but a public event exposing the full extent of irresponsibility and criminal financial management. From then on, William lived most of his time abroad, not for tourism, but to escape creditors. He constantly devised desperate schemes, borrowing, cheating, begging money from wealthy friends, and exploiting any connections that were still willing to engage with him. Meanwhile, Helena lived in a marriage that was extensively documented in the press as a series of public affairs. William made no secret of his relationships. His name appeared in gossip columns so often that betrayal became a habit. 30 years, Helena endured. Human, and her reputation dragged down along with her husband. The property that should have provided security became a prison. It financed William's lifestyle while gradually draining Helena's spirit and finances. They had 4 children, and that is what made it impossible for Helena to leave easily in that era. A divorced duchess not only lost her husband but could also lose her social standing. But William didn't stop there. In 1935, just 4 years after divorcing Helena, he was sentenced to 9 months in prison at Hem Prison, Wormwood Scrubs, for fraud. He had made false statements to obtain money from a pawnbroker. This was no longer extravagance. This was a crime. And it raises a chilling question. If he could commit fraud after divorce, how many illegal acts had Helena unwittingly covered up during their 31 years of marriage? By that point, the truth could no longer be concealed. William Montagu was not a fallen nobleman. He was a swindler in crown. And Helena, the woman who had given him both her youth and her fortune, finally reached a point of no return. Divorce, ruin, and the moment. She finally escaped after more than 3 decades. Helena Zimmerman's marriage and William Angus Drogo Montagu was beyond saving. No money, no honor, no pretense left. 31 years with a man who had squandered her fortune, openly betrayed her, and finally revealed himself to be a true swindler. By December 1931, Helena finally filed for divorce. The official reason: continuous adultery and extravagant spending. But those cold legal words could not fully describe the extent of the devastation. When the marriage ended, almost nothing remained of the empire that Eugene Zimmerman had built with his entire life. Helena walked out of her marriage at age 53, no longer the youthful heiress, no longer the iconic American heiress, but a woman who had been drained both financially and emotionally. And then William Montagu did one last thing to prove that Helena was right to leave him. Just days after the divorce, on December 17, 1931, he remarried to the stage actress Kathleen Dawes. No time for regret, no sign of grief, not a moment of reflection. The 31-year marriage was just a chapter already explored. But what society didn't expect was that Helena didn't disappear. She didn't retreat into seclusion. She didn't collapse. She didn't accept the ending of the story in the role of a victim. People thought that at that age, after so many years of exploitation, Helena would live the rest of her life in silence and bitterness. But they were wrong, because what Helena inherited was not just money. She inherited her father's will to survive. A second marriage, real love, not a title for sale at 53. After 31 years in a marriage built on lies, debt, and humiliation, Helena Zimmerman faced a stark reality. She had lost almost everything except the right to choose her life again. High society no longer expected anything from her in their eyes. Helena was finished. A once wealthy heiress, drained by a bankrupt duke, entered middle age with a heavy past, but Helena no longer sought status. Neither did she need a title this time. She just needed a decent man. And then, in 1937, Helena met Arthur George Keith Falconer, not a fortune hunter, not a man who lived by appearances. He was a professional soldier, educated at Eton, who had served in the Boer War and World War I. No scandal, no debt, no fraud. A man whose past was built on discipline and honor, not on unpaid bills. On November 23, 1937, Helena married for the second time in Edinburgh. No secret, no rush, no escaping family. This was not a marriage to save face. This was a conscious choice between two adults. Helena became Countess of Kintore, but for the first time in her life, the title was no longer a burden. She left the 3 mansions associated with her previous failed marriages to move to Keith Hall, her new husband's ancestral estate in northern Scotland, and it was there that Helena began living the happiest years of her life. No more meaningless parties, no more bills piling up, no more prying press, only silence, respect, and a husband who treated her as a life partner, not a source of income. The contrast between her 2 marriages couldn't be clearer. Her first husband couldn't afford fake pearls and ended up in prison. Her second husband spent his entire life in the military and gave Helena a peace that money could never buy. Helena lived at Keith Hall for 34 years, longer than the 31 years she was trapped in her first marriage, as if her body and mind were finally allowed to rest. Legacy and the meaning of fake pearls. Helena Zimmerman lived at Keith Hall for another 34 years. 34 years of peace, 34 years free from being hunted for money, 34 years free from hiding debts, scandals, or humiliation, a number worth contemplating, because it was longer than the entire 31 years of hell that she had endured with William Angus Drogo Montagu. As if having escaped him, Helena's body and spirit were finally allowed to live on. Helena died on December 15, 1971, at Keith Hall, Scotland, at the age of 93. A rare longevity for a woman who had been drained financially and spiritually for much of her adult life. And that raises a chilling question. If Helena hadn't married William Montagu, how much longer would she have lived? How different would her life have been? But perhaps what matters more is not what she lost, what this story leaves behind. The 3 strings of imitation pearls that William bought in 1900, that never paid for, but have become the perfect symbol for it all. They look valuable, they reflect the lights of high society, they take the form of wealth, but inside, they are utterly empty, just like him. A title without money, a marriage without love. A man who lived by appearances and left behind only bills, debts, and hurt. Helena's father, Eugene Zimmerman, built his fortune with true courage, surviving torpedoes, facing war, making timely business decisions. It was this fortune that attracted predators, but Helena, by leaving that marriage, proved that she inherited not only her father's money, but also his power. It took her over 30 years to escape the trap of title, but the rest of her life, she lived in respect, peace, and true love. Helena Zimmerman's story is not just the tragedy of an heiress, it is a timeless warning. Titles can be fake, wealth can be exploited, but character cannot be bought. And sometimes the most glittering thing in life is just a fake pearl.